Welcome to In Her Voice, a podcast created for women who listen to and live by their deepest wisdom, their inner voice. This was made for you, the woman who feels pulled to more, to lead, to create, to dream, and to be a world changer. My name is Kelly Covert, and I am an inner voice coach. Join me here each week as we explore what it means to reach for your inspired potential, all while honoring your worthiness each and every day. Well, hello there. Thanks for listening. This is Kelly. I'm so glad that you're here today. Usually this would be, in the order of things, a solo episode. And I have a whole list of solo episodes that I am working on for you. But I am in the middle of a recording block, and I had this interview, and my soul said to me, this needs to come out right away. And you know me, I listen to my inner voice. So I have for you a beautiful conversation with Iona Holloway. It is stunning. It is just stunning. And I think that you're really going to love it, especially if you struggle with being perfect, striving to be perfect. And this is really all about how perfect steals from us. I do want to share that a trigger warning. We do talk a little bit about eating disorders. We don't talk a lot about it. We talk a little bit about it. But if that is hard for you, just be warned. It is sort of more in the middle of the conversation. But really what we're talking about is letting go of perfect. Because that, for many of us, including myself, is our life's work. Let me tell you a little bit about Iona. Iona Holloway is a #1 best-selling author, coach, and speaker. She helps women stop shrinking their bodies, worth, and power through vulnerability, creativity, and breath work. She and her partner Sean live in Boston with a very clingy Shiba Inu and a cat that Iona has never held. Her pets have taught her a lot about embodied trauma. You can learn more about Iona at ionaholloway.com. And the book that Iona has recently released is called Ghost. And I began reading this and I just was floored. It's so devastatingly beautiful. And it really spoke to me in a way that not very many things do. It felt like she was talking to me. And because of that, I wanted to read just a little excerpt from the first chapter of this book. So the name of the book is Ghost, Why Perfect Women Shrink. And this is an excerpt from chapter 1. Women like us, they will never see the ways we struggle. They will never realize what fuels us to soar is not ease, but salty and thick fear, the fear of being discovered a fraud. They will never understand that talent does not mean painless, that competence does not mean effortless, that gifts do not protect us from the rocks that wreck a soul. They will never see how hard we have been working all this time. To them, we are so perfect. We are nothing, barely human, immune, invisible, a ghost. I see you. It's powerful. These words are powerful, and our conversation is powerful. I hope that you enjoy this conversation with Iona Holloway. Iona Holloway, welcome to In Her Voice. I am so thrilled to have you here today.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Kelly.
Of course. And we were talking that we have a little bit in common because you spent some time in Syracuse, where I live, where you went to college. And so that was fun to sort of reminisce about that. And I just feel like already connected to you and looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, I have a funny story about Syracuse. I did So I'm originally from Scotland. I did zero research when I was recruited to play field hockey at Syracuse. I was just excited to be leaving Scotland, to be honest. So I Googled it perhaps once and saw Syracuse, New York, and I thought I was going to college in New York City.
No, this is definitely not New York City.
It is not, but it's wonderful. And it's a really special place in my heart.
Mm-hmm. Well, we were talking before we got on about where we wanted to start, and you've written this beautiful book called Ghost. And I have been lucky enough to have an advanced copy and have been reading. I think I'm about 2 or 3 chapters in, and it is heartbreaking and beautiful. It's poetry and art and prose and self-help. It's like this huge genre. Like, I don't even know how I could begin to define it. And I wanted to start with what you mean by ghost. What does that mean?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for saying all those beautiful things about Ghost. And I think you touch on a point that's very close to my heart, which was that when I was writing this book, I didn't want it to be a fluffy self-help book. I also didn't want to just write my story. And that perhaps comes to the reason why this book is called Ghost. I start Ghost by addressing women like us, and I go at length about what that means. And the woman I wrote this book for is for the women who hide in plain sight and what I would call high-achieving, struggling women. And these are the women that don't get help. These are the women that everyone assumes are fine. These are the women who I would say are gaslighted by their own gifts, almost cursed by their own confidence. Yes, the through line of Ghost is my battle with food in my body, but the experience of being invisible and struggling invisibly is something that I see so many high-achieving women in my life work through, and both, work through and perhaps not even know how to address. Because when the assumption is that everyone thinks you're fine, and not just fine, you're perfect, we begin to disappear in our lives, just thinking that all we have to do is pursue, and that's the reason why the subtitle is Why Perfect Women Shrink. When we're gaslighted by our own gifts, when we're too good for our own good, and when everyone assumes they're fine, we get caught up in this battle to be perfect, and in that battle, we disappear. So that's the reason why Ghost is called what it is. It's really a story about the invisible experiences of high-achieving women.
Mm-hmm. It really, to me, hit home. Like when I was reading that first chapter, when you're describing ghost women, I identified with 95% of what you were saying, this idea that you're so good at something. It's almost like you feel that if you aren't good at something, then you'll get noticed for the wrong thing. It's like, I just have to keep being good so no one notices that I have no idea what I'm doing.
Yeah, exactly. And something that I used to often think about myself is I don't even know what I like, because all I care about is being perfect at everything. I was always so jealous of my friends growing up who had these things that they said they loved or knew what they wanted to do when they grew up. I had no idea, because I had no idea who I was, because all I was focused on was being good at everything, winning everything. When that was in school, it was grades. When it was sport and art, I did love those things, but I had to be perfect at them. And then as my life kind of rolled on and I started meeting more of the world and meeting more people in the world, I realized just how hard it was going to be to keep being perfect and the best at everything. And that's when life started getting really painful for me. And also, as I continued to grow up, I became less and less sure of who I even was, because all I was doing was working and trying to be perfect. But I was completely disconnected from who I was as a person and what I even liked to do. And I know that that experience is not one that's unique to me.
No, it definitely isn't. And, what really struck me about what you just said is that this addiction, and you call it that, the addiction to being perfect, really stole all of your joy.
Yeah. Perfect. Perfect steals everything. And I like to use the metaphor of perfect being beautifully summarized by the black and white. So it's either everything or we're nothing. And that translates to the experience of so many women who either think one moment we're wonderful and the next we don't want anyone to know us. And I like to use the metaphor of nature, because pure black and pure white never exist in nature. There is no perfect in nature, and yet nature is the most human thing in this world. And that's what happens when we get trapped in the story of perfection. We disconnect ourselves from our own humanity in pursuit of something that is actually impossible to achieve, understand, or recognize. And that's why the pursuit of perfect is a futile one. It's why it's a destructive one. It cuts us off from the natural experience of being human and places expectations on us that we are never, ever, ever going to be able to meet or live up to.
Mm-hmm. What's coming up for me is the past. And I don't want to discount anyone's past, because I think it's an important part of understanding who we are. But I also wonder how important, how big of a role it plays in the healing. Like, is it possible to move forward without spending a lot of time in the past?
I love that question. And because I think it is so easy to enter the rumination zone and become what I would call a memorial of your past, as if the past is done and fixed and somewhat determines what's available for us moving forward. I'm such a big believer of grabbing what we can and understanding everything that we can from our past, but you better be pulling it forward and transforming it into something that is helping you heal. I often call the past bleeding diamonds, because I think that there is something so valuable about understanding why we get into pain and the reasons why we get into pain. And I go into that in length in Ghost, but you can't just leave things valuable and bleeding and just carry them along with you and say, this is the woman that I am and I'm always going to be this way. It's your responsibility, it's our responsibility to see the ways that we're hurting and find a way to learn from them and transform through them. Because there's so, like you said, there's value in the past, but you cannot get stuck living there, because then you just turn your life into a memorial. And that is such a disservice to us. That's not caring. That's committing to a past narrative that is no longer working.
Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing I think about the past is, while it's unchanging, like we can't change what happened to us, our perspective can always be evolving. So it's about how we see it, not about how it was. Don't you think?
Absolutely. And I love the idea of perspective and understanding just how important that lens is, because we can always look at things 100 different ways. But if we're used to always putting on the same glasses and pointing to our past and saying, see, this is why I'm broken, or this is why I'm in pain, or this happened, therefore this happened, that's disempowering. It's our responsibility to find a way to look at what has happened to us or what we've lived through and understand it and find a new way to make meaning around it. I don't think lives are any different than works of art. It's like it's raw material, it's past experience, and you can create that and look at it. You can look at it from above, below, you can walk around it. We can change our perspective, on what we think makes us broken and actually turn it into an invitation to learn a new way.
I love that word, invitation. It feels so loving, doesn't it?
Yeah. Oh, and it's not, invitation is not a word that I would have ever used or offered to myself a few years ago, because my life was so much about rules and directives and control, and this is what we should be doing. And I wrote a book. I've always loved writing, but I'm such a big advocate of language and understanding it. And I point it out in the women that I work with all the time. Like, watch the words that you are using to talk about yourself. Watch the way that you are making your reality by choosing words that are actually cruel. And things like invitations, things like practicing, things like trying our best. These are all words that actually women like us, ghost women, when our standards are so high, we're dying for that gentleness. I have a whole chapter, I think it sits right in the middle of the book, called Thaw. It's about thawing from that emotional freeze, that hardness and that cruelty and that tension that perfect can create in a human body. And that comes with learning how to feel our emotions, but it also comes with learning how to speak to ourselves and giving ourselves invitations as often as we can, because we deserve that kindness. We really do.
Mm-hmm. How did you begin to shift your own language? What did that look like for you? Because I know for me, I'm older than you. I'm 46. Mm-hmm. And I tried to be perfect for a really, really long time. And those patterns of thoughts and language and the words we use, they don't just you don't just switch a light switch and have them to be changed. Like it's work. And so I wonder for you what that work looked like.
Yeah, sure. Well, one, I think there's a lot of things that would go into that, but one of the things that I love to start with clients is the idea of permission and acceptance, and just stepping into an observation role of, how do I live my life currently? Because often we're so enmeshed with our experiences and the ways that we think and feel and talk about ourselves, either internally or to other people. It's too close. We're too close to ourselves. We're too close to our pain. We're one. And so the first step towards this is trying to step into an observation role, detach yourself slightly from your life, and just take an inventory of, what are repetitive things I'm saying to myself? What's the tone of my language? What is my attitude and behavior towards myself? We can't change what we don't know, and often we have no idea what's actually going on. So a little bit of space is really valuable for that. And then the other thing, which I think is really kind and generous to ourselves, is giving ourselves permission to try a new way. So often when we are connected and enmeshed with perfection, we want things to work immediately because our identity depends on it. Because if we're not perfect, then we're broken. And something that we need to experience over and over, like you said, over and over and over again, is the permission to try new things, the permission to try new practices, the permission to perhaps use different words to talk to ourselves. And none of that, it takes time for a flower to bloom. It's not just, you don't just stick the bulb in the ground and then the next day it's blooming a sunflower. Kindness needs watered. Kindness needs tended. And I always use the metaphor of a crying baby on the floor. If you're a human being and a baby is lying on the floor crying, what do? Do you kick it? Do you tell it it's terrible? Do you leave it there? Of course not. You pick it up and then you soothe it. And then when it cries again, you pick it up and you soothe it. We are these babies in our lives. if we've lived a life of perfection, we are these babies, and we have to learn how to hold ourselves. And like you said, that is done over and over and over again. But if we can find visuals or words that allow us to approach ourselves with a little bit more kindness, I think that's a really valuable first step.
Mm-hmm. And I know for me, something that has been huge for me is understanding that, like you said, we're going to try to be perfect at this thing too.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Right. And we're going to mess up. Like, we're going to have the thoughts that beat ourselves up. Like, we're going to go back to the old way, because that's the path that our brains are used to taking and our bodies are used to taking. Right. And so for me, I have a very deep and wide practice of grace and forgiveness. How about you?
Yeah, I love that question. I've even been challenging this with myself recently, and I'd be actually interested. I mean, I've read Ghost 100 times, but I'd be interested to go back and see how often I use the word path or journey, because even like the more this work settles into me and the more women I speak to and all that beautiful stuff, the more I get detached from the linear quality of paths and journeys, and the more I enjoy the idea of increasing our capacity to experience, and that being almost more of a orb-like circular experience than it is a path. Because something else that I believe really deeply is that all of this is a remembering. All of this work of, quote, becoming ourselves is actually just us remembering who we were, who we always have been, before stories got wrapped around us, before identity wrapped itself around us, before we decided what we should be in this world or what others reflected back to us and told us was appropriate. We were something first. We were ourselves first. And so increasing our capacity to remember and seeing all these opportunities not as steps back or forward, but more as pushing out the edges of our comfort level with being ourselves, that feels a lot more grace-filled. That feels a lot kinder than this constant idea of gaining and losing ground. I don't know if that resonates with you.
Oh my gosh. I can't even begin to tell you how much I love that. Because to me, and I use this concept of being on the journey a lot with my clients and with myself, but I hear what you're saying. It's almost like if you feel like you're always on a path, then it's like you're always trudging, right? Yes. And sometimes you run and sometimes you're taking really tiny baby steps, but it's always about moving forward. But what if we're able to just sit inside of ourselves and be here and appreciate all of the things that make us who we are? And like you said, and I believe this too, remembering who we once were. I keep a little picture of myself when I was 2. I think I was 2 or 3. I don't know exactly, on my desk.
Yeah.
For that reason, like, she knew, that little girl knew. And every time I can go back to that place, I'm also in the knowing. And that is really grace-filled. I think that you're spot on with that, Iona.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up the photo of the child, because I mean, I dedicated this book to my niece, and I said, to Evie, never disappear. And when I witness, I mean, she's just about 2, so she's similar to the age of your photo. When I just witness the life force and the vibrancy and the color of this child's life, and then I look around the world, or I think about the overall color of the experience of my life from a very young age, just in the way I felt about myself and what I had to be doing, it just got so grey. It got so black and white. It was drained of all of the vibrancy that was me once. And so I have a whole chapter in the book called Child about how to reconnect and reparent with that invisible child that started to disappear at some point. And it's another, just like the metaphor of the baby on the floor, it's sometimes really difficult to love ourselves grown, given what we know of what we've perhaps done or been through. But it is really hard to deny love to a child. And that inner child, that childlike part of us, she's here. I think I use the metaphor of the Russian doll in the book. It is that experience. We're not one woman. We are a collection of moments in time, and that connection to our youngest self, who is probably the purest expression of remembering that we're going to get. And so learning how to connect with that and resource that joy and vibrancy is a really beautiful one.
So useful. And there's so many ways to do that too. I know for me, I have a meditation that I've shared with everyone that is really about just visualizing that little girl and sending her love. I know I've written letters to myself at all of my ages that felt like needed me to like connect with her. What are some ways that you connect with your inner child?
So those are both practices that I've done and that I love and I highly recommend to anyone. And then I like to think of the inner child as a channel. Like once she's feeling safe and comforted by us, I think that connection to a younger part of us can be such a beautiful conduit for play and silliness and laughter and creativity. And I think that being in the sort of space that I am and you are, there's a lot of this talk about we should be playing more. We should be playing more. It's like, what does that even mean? We're so unpracticed in play. But something that I've done pretty consistently, or not pretty consistently, very consistently over the last few years is things like allowing my inner child to choose what I wear in the morning. And let me tell you, those outfits don't match. and you know, that's cool. I'm here for it. Things like what did I love to eat as a child? And especially with my history of what became like a truly brutal battle with food in my body, like learning how to feel safe eating chicken nuggets and macaroni cheese again was a huge part. And then even like in the first few months of me doing this work, I just had this like lightning bolt desire to dye my hair pink, having had like not touched my hair in years. And I swear that was my inner child. And I've kept it pink ever since because it feels fun and light. And I'm not saying that everyone has to like go out and get a really expensive bleach job on their hair, but it's moments like this. Like these are fun, light, enjoyable, easy moments. And they're also profound in sewing us back together.
Yes. So I just want to encourage everyone who's listening to think about how you feel right now. Like I know for me, as I hear you talk about macaroni and cheese and chicken nuggets and dyeing your hair pink and picking out clothes, like whatever you feel like wearing, my face is smiling. I'm feeling joy in my body. I am happy when I hear you say that. And that's not an accident. Like that is your soul. That is my soul responding to your inner child, to your joyfulness. And the beautiful thing about that is if I can feel that from you, that also means I can access that inside of me, right?
Oh, 100%. And I love that you paused there because I just realized like I can hear the smile in my voice too. So thanks for that. That was a beautiful gift.
You're welcome. I want to talk about shrinking because I feel that some women might listen to this and they think, well, this isn't for me because I have never had an eating disorder. Mm-hmm. And that includes me. I have never had an eating disorder. Have I struggled with my body? Yes. Have I wanted to make it smaller? Yes. Have I tried to make it smaller? Yes. Have I given up on that? Mostly. I'm still working on it, you know, but our bodies aren't the only ways we shrink.
Oh,
Right?
yes.
So
Oh my goodness.
so let's
Yes.
talk about shrinking. Like, what are the ways we do this to ourselves?
Yeah, I'm really happy you brought this up. And I think it's even fascinating because I don't think I use the word eating disorder in my book. In the parts, like in the full book, I don't think I use it. But there's obviously a lot of feedback on that part of it. And it's funny because in my mind somewhere along the way, because it was supportive for me, I transitioned this idea of having an eating disorder into my experience of shrinking and why that was. And so I'm glad you brought this up, because I think that the lessons of ghosts extend so far beyond food and body. The main ways that I talk about or see shrinking in women is, yes, in body, but also in worth and power. And if it's helpful for folks, I think you can translate shrinking into playing small, being quiet, or turning away from what you know is true. And just thinking about how that manifests in your life. So, for example, all the times you swallow your voice or opinion for the protection, perhaps, of someone else's feelings, or because you don't back yourself, that to me is the alchemy of shrinking worth and power. It's like you have a stance, you didn't think that it was worth your own voice. That's you shrinking. In the same way that I have the privilege and honor of working with a lot of creative women, and the things that stop them sharing beautiful art, beautiful writing, and sharing that with the world is because they're scared of it not being good enough or perfect. And again, our creativity and what we have to offer is our power. And so often it is blocked because we are shrinking in our worth. And again, it's conscious, it's unconscious, and it's complicated. But I think that the experience of playing small for women, for everyone, is a universal one. We're scared to be ourselves.
100%. 100%. I've shared this before on the podcast, but I can distinctly remember being in 7th grade. So I was, 12 or 13, and gangly and tall. I was like taller than all of the boys, and super smart. I was in all gifted honors classes, and like the cutest boy, Denny Douglas, I still remember his name. The cutest boy in my class asked me what I got on my report card. Mm-hmm. And of course I had all A's, but I didn't say that.
Yeah.
I said, oh, A's and B's. Because if I had all A's, what does that say about me? It means I'm a nerd, or I might be better than you, or I brag about myself, like all of these things. And I've had to go back and forgive my 7th grade self for that over and over again.
Yeah.
Because that was when I started. Like that was me saying, I don't want to show all of who I am. That was me shrinking.
Yeah. Absolutely. I love that as an example. I also love it as an example because, and perhaps I always say perhaps it's a Scottish thing, but I don't think I'm realizing that nothing's a Scottish thing. It's just a universal experience of women. But that phrase of being too big for your boots, yes. Like growing up, that idea of extending beyond the size of the shoes that you were given metaphorically was one that was so abhorrent. It was an indication of not being classy, of not being tasteful, of being arrogant,
of not being ladylike.
Yeah. And I think that that so many of us, I think, rest on this sliding scale of thinking that if we become too confident or too grounded in our own self-worth, that immediately means we're on a slippery slope to being arrogant. And confidence and arrogance are not a continuum. You can be confident and embedded, deeply embodied in your own worth and power, and not be not be arrogant.
Yes.
It's not the same thing.
Yes, it is not the same thing. Ooh, that is good stuff. So just sidebar, where I grew up in the South of the United States, we called it too big for your britches.
Britches, yes. Yeah.
So, it's all the same thing. And I can't tell you how many times I heard that in my house. Don't get too big for your britches. Like that was a thing in my house too. So, but I love that you said that confidence is not the same thing as arrogance. We do not have to fear confidence.
Right. I think it also ties in perhaps in an interesting way with something else that I talk about at length in the book, which is competition with other women when we see them either shining or perhaps giving us an opportunity to feel strong by diminishing them. It's that experience of scarcity, like that we're stealing from someone else or taking up more of their space when we are more of ourselves. And something that I think is so important for us to understand is that we can't steal worth from other people when we know that it lives within us. We can't steal other people's power when we know in our hearts that it lives in us. And if more women were able to stop shrinking in their own lives and inhabit their own worth in the way that we're talking about here, this jealousy and scarcity around what's available, I'm not saying it will ever disappear, but it will lessen. Like the intensity of it will lessen because we're not stealing from each other when we're more of ourselves. But we are so terrified, like we're so scared either that, Kelly, you're stealing my worth by saying something smarter in this conversation than me, or the opposite. It's such a complicated kind of interconnection of lacking worth that we as a human body are experiencing.
Yeah. And I think on the flip side of that, when each of us come to this conversation today, and I feel this deeply, standing in our worth, understanding our gifts and what we have to offer, it elevates it, it magnifies it, like exponentially increases the value of what each of us are offering.
100%. Absolutely.
And it feels amazing.
Oh, it feels great. It feels great. I can't tell you like how many years of being a lone wolf and thinking I had to achieve everything in isolation because otherwise I'd be losing my worth and power to other people. This is so much still of my work. Like it's such a joy for me to hire younger women to perhaps support me in things or to receive help from other people. This is me healing. Like me learning how to collaborate with other people and us being able to elevate each other. I mean, not that many years ago, that was a foreign concept to me. Why would I? Because I have to be perfect and do everything myself. There is so much beauty in connecting with other human beings, enjoying their gifts, and letting it all, like you said, collectively elevate each other. That is such a gift. And I also think it's such an important point about, like, quote, healing work. That is
Right.
healing work.
That is.
Me hiring someone to support me is healing work. Just in the same way that me talking to my inner child is healing work.
100%. I love that so much. I when we started this before we recorded, I said, we'll go about 30 or 35 minutes, but maybe longer. And so I'm feeling like we'll go a little bit longer because I want to talk before we go about something that I read on your website.
Yeah.
And when I read it, I like shouted out loud. Like, oh my gosh, I think that's what I said. And so this is a quote and I'm going to say it and we're all going to sit with it. And then you're going to talk to us about it. Okay.
Sounds good.
Here we go. Suffering is greedy. That just like stopped me in my tracks. Suffering is greedy. What do we tell me about that. Tell me about that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm laughing because I don't remember writing it, even though my website is like, I spent hours on it in the last month or two, just like really feeling into what I wanted to share on it. But to put it succinctly, I think that suffering is greedy because I believe that in our hearts, we're meant to be generous. We're meant to be generous with ourselves. We're meant to be generous with our lives. And if we are wrapped up in suffering, if we are wrapped up in our own pain, if we are not believing that we have anything to offer, we are stealing from not just ourselves, but we're stealing from other people because we're not sharing ourselves as kindly and as generously as we could be. One of my favorite quotes is from Martha Graham, and she talks about our lives as being channels, that we're essentially, all we're doing is trying to keep the channel open so that what's meant to come through us can come through us. And so often suffering builds a wall and it keeps everything inside. It stops the pure expression of who we are to shine through. And it also denies our ability to share it with other people. And to me, that is a travesty. To use a kind of concrete example of this, when I was really struggling with food in my body, I stopped writing. And I'm not trying to say that I'm Hemingway, and I'm not trying to say that I'm the most talented writer out there, but I can write. I love writing. It's generous to myself, and I believe it's generous to other people. And this book would never have existed if I hadn't stopped suffering.
Oh my gosh. Yes, all of this. I really want everyone that is listening right now to sit inside of this. Number one, suffering is not required. And number two, what is it keeping you from? What is it holding back from all of the people around you when you are stuck behind a wall of suffering? And, I feel like we could go on and on, but I think that this is the right place to stop because this is where the work begins. And so I want to circle back around to the ghost woman. And I'm really curious to know what you think, how you would describe the opposite of a ghost woman.
That's a wonderful question. At the end of Ghost, I talk about rendering ourselves real. And by that, like, the visual that comes to me is like truly the filtering through of color, but also the becoming solid. And in contrast to Ghost Woman, where you can't quite get a sense of us and we're invisible and perhaps we're shrinking and no one quite knows what they're dealing with. To render yourself real in your life is to own the color of it, own the size of it, and let that be who you are. And also you've just given me, I think, a really beautiful opportunity to think about my next book.
Excellent.
What is that defining word or phrase? And maybe there isn't one, but I love you. I love that.
And here's the power of like blending your gifts with another, right? Inspiration and flow and all of those beautiful things. I know I will be finishing Ghost as quickly as I possibly can. I just started it yesterday, so that's why I haven't gotten very far. But I just want to say to everyone who's listening, go get yourself a copy. It is beautiful. There are drawings. Did you do the drawings also?
No, I didn't. That was one of my clients, which was like another really beautiful example of collaboration. And those are by an artist called Laura Tangai.
And they're just stunning. They're so evocative, I think,
Yeah.
of these feelings. So it, like I said, it's poetry, it's prose, it's self-help, it's Iona, really, it's you. It's you. It's you in a book. Thank you so much for being here. How can people connect with you on a deeper level if that's something they would like to do?
Of course, I'd be honored. So my website is ionaholloway.com. You can email me info@ionaholloway.com, especially if you've read Ghost. I've been loving hearing stories from readers. And then I'm also mostly active on Instagram, and I'm at Iona Holloway there as well.
Fantastic. And we'll put links to all of those things so people can click right through on their podcast app and follow you and send you an email, all of the things that they might want to do. So last question, your inner voice, your voice of wisdom, the voice that loves you and guides you, what is she saying to you these days?
Two things. So one is stay open, and the other is be brave. And to me, those are both the opposite of trying to be perfect, being open to what we can share with other people and being brave in that. So that's what's with me just now.
I love it. Well, I will close by saying, I see you. I see you, like all of you, like defined and rendered. And I see your bravery and honor it. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. This was a real delight. Thanks, Kelly.
If that really hit home with you, I want you to know that you are enough. You are enough right now. You don't have to try harder. You are enough right now. And I know for myself that I cannot hear that message enough. And I just encourage you to figure out how you need to remind yourself of that, whatever it looks like. I have tools in the Enoughness Planner, in my coaching, in everything that I'm offering on my website, kellycovert.com. So many tools that you can use. And if you choose to use those, great. And if you don't, find some that work. Find some that work. Because I, more than anything, do not want to see any women shrinking. Not shrinking their bodies, not shrinking their power, not shrinking themselves. If you would like to listen to the 5-year-old you meditation that I spoke of in the interview, I will put a link to that in the show notes. And so you can click right on through, probably in the podcast app that you're listening to, and listen to that. It's a really great way to get back to that self that knew how wonderful you were already before you had to do anything. Remember this. We need you. We need you fully present, big, bold, all of you, not shrinking, but filling the space, taking up so much space with your heart and with your mind and with your body. We need you. You are worthy.